Welcome to Family Counseling, Social Work and Family Counseling. So this also is a fourth-year elective course, and I'm going to refer you as we go through this video to many other videos that I hope you'll also have time to watch. We've created videos, Carlene and I, and Tuba, we've created videos on disability, we've created videos on poverty, class issues, toxic masculinity, all kinds of videos. I think we now have 20 that are under the title of Social Work with Victims of Abuse. I conceptualize this course, Family Counseling, as kind of like a sibling course with Social Work with Victims of Abuse, Family Counseling, Social Work with Victims of Abuse. Of course, there's tons of overlap and tangle between those two domains of knowledge and praxis.
Otherwise known as interdisciplinarity.
Yes, interdisciplinarity, that's right. Polyvocality, all of these kind of tangles and messes. So, but this one right here is the foundational idea I wish for you to get for this course on family counseling. So, here's what we're going to talk about first. Even the word family is sort of an F word sometimes. Although everybody is tempted to think of the here and now when you're with your clients, I wish you to reflect upon the last 500 years, the last 5,000 years, and what does that mean for family. And here's a little expression you can teach to your clients or you can use for yourself. I don't live in the past lives in me. I don't live in the past lives in me. And some of you modern young folk will say that's not even true, and I'll say, hold that thought and prove me wrong throughout your career. I will say to you that right now when we think of family, there's two ways we usually think of family. Family is based on biology. So, you're my blood sister, you're my blood child, you're my grandparent, bloodline, blood, right?
Biological.
Biological. So family is largely based on biology, blood, and I would suggest to you that biology is completely random shit, right? Did that sperm happen to connect on that day with that egg? Mm-hmm. Random. My understanding is there could be 1,000 little spermies during any act of intercourse. Maybe 1,000,000 for those of you in biology, I don't really know. But it's completely random whether that sperm on that day connected with that egg. So for the purposes of perhaps humoring me through the rest of this course, we're going to assume that's true what I just said. Biology is largely random. If I take 100 people in a room, it's completely random whether you'll get MS someday, whether you'll get cancer someday, whether you'll get arthritis,
whether you'll get Alzheimer's.
There's all kinds of aspects of biology that are completely random. Someday scientists might refine that and have a really brilliant way to control these things, but at the moment, for the clients you're working with in social work, in family counseling, at a women's shelter, at a group home, in the jail system, at the hospital if you're a social worker, at the hospital if you're a social worker in the high school system, much of what has happened through biology is chaos. You might have been born really, really smart. Big brain. Your sister being born 2 years later may have a learning disability. This is the randomness of biology. That's how I mean it. The other aspect of family construction is law. Law has not been completely random. Law over the last 500 years or 5,000 years has been built on, in a Canadian context, it's been built on British colonialism, it's been built on patriarchal ownership, it's been built on capitalist legacy, it's been built on Catholic Christian religion.
And heteronormativity.
Heteronormativity. Exactly. So, for the most part, the idea, if you watch those movies, I kind of romantically, I don't know, it's a guilty, dirty pleasure to watch these movies of the Queen of England, or, these, Henry VIII, and
Like
they
the historical dramas.
historical drama, and they all have such beautiful outfits on, and all of that.
Romanticized.
They're romanticized, they're made elegant, and all this, but really, behind the scenes, you had all the misery of the poor folk who were mopping the floors, or who could be raped by the king.
And at a time when hygiene wasn't necessarily the forefront or even our front of thought.
So how do I bring that in? I'll give you an example right now in terms of the social work profession. I'm almost 60 years old. I graduated with my college diploma when I was maybe 24. At that time, people still use the term, this is the illegitimate child of Bob, and these are the legitimate children of Bob. So until very recently, there was the idea of legitimate children were born from a legal marriage, and illegitimate children were born from a woman who had a child outside of wedlock, a woman who had a child where the legal ring wasn't on her finger. Maybe the man she had the child from was already married, therefore she was a harlot, she was a sinner, she was a home wrecker.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe, isn't it also like if they didn't live together? Like if, say for example, he had to leave for work for long periods of time?
Well, there was, at that time in our mainstream world, social workers had the imagination that there were basically two kinds of children, legitimate and illegitimate, right? If you were legitimate, somebody was responsible for paying for your troubles. So if this is Bob's legitimate child and the child needs groceries, we would try and find this absentee father and force him to pay for the groceries. We'd force him to pay child support, alimony, that kind of thing. If the child was illegitimate, first we want to really stigmatize the mother.
And the child.
And the child. And make them feel ashamed of their identity in some kind of way.
Because that child definitely chose that for themselves.
Precisely. Precisely. So, law in Canadian society around family involved legitimate Indigenous people who legitimately had status through marriage and through heritage and through status cards and so on. Legitimate children had certain rights, privileges, and if you were the legitimate father or mother of a child, you had legal and moral and economic responsibility. Mm-hmm. Versus these other folks who have come into the world in a bad way, and that is the dimension of Christian and Catholic beliefs, that the sin and the sinner and the child need to somehow be made to feel bad because they weren't born through a real marriage. So, for the moment, let's say, until very recently, and still today, family as a construct existed through law and biology. Law was Christian, capitalist, heteronormative, patriarchal, and had certain intentions of who owned what and why. We even had for a very long time a man owned his wife, i.e. he could rape her and it wasn't really rape because she's owned by him anyway. He could beat her and it wasn't really a crime because she did marry him and they became one, so how could he be charged with beating himself?
That, and it wasn't the size of his thumb, so it's okay.
Right. There were all kinds of laws that existed to give men more power over their women and children.
Or to remove power from those things, because it's not necessarily one and the same. For example, like with status, because it was both law in the sense that, like if an Indigenous woman married a non-Indigenous man, she and her children lost status.
Right, so they lost status, they became one with the white man she married, and she had to disappear her own identity.
Exactly, and then her biology was completely negated.
Right. Or her choices of where does she feel her affinities and alliances. So that brings me to the third domain. So we've got three things here to reflect upon. There's my art piece for today. There's biology, law, and then this third domain over here, affiliation and affinity.
Is that like self-identification?
Self-identification, this is love, this is affection, this is loyalty, this is alliance, this is connection. So if I go over here back to law for a minute, gay and lesbian folk, until very recently, could not form a legal marriage. And that has consequences for issues like pension splitting, for owning of houses. This had consequences in terms of public affirmation and celebration. This had for adoption issues. A lot of the work that social workers do around family are around these very issues.
And even crimes, like hate crimes, for example.
Hate crime, care for elderly folk. In the past, if a couple, through affinity and affiliation and love, felt connection and had lived together for 35 years, it was possible if one of those people ended up in the hospital with a head injury, that the person who's loved them and lived with them for 35 years would not be the one making the assessment of whether or not to pull the tube, or whether or not they'll be cremated, or they'll be buried, or those kind of really powerful emotive decisions would have been made by the legal family member, maybe the sibling of that elderly person who had died, versus the person who'd lived with them and loved them for 35 years. So in social work, we really need to both be atoning for where we've made mistakes in the past, and we want to be attuned for where we're going in the future in terms of what is a family? What is a family? For the purposes of this course, and what I wish for us as a profession, is family should be about affiliation and affinity.
And significance, I think. Like,
Yeah,
who is
exactly.
significant in your life?
Significant others, how they affiliate.
Yeah.
How they affiliate. So if I take a very imaginative story, but could be a true story, in our world of family, of affinity and affiliation, if I said to Carlene, I've come to adore you, and I want to adopt you, even though you're an adult, and even though we're not related by biology or law, if we made a contract where I said, I'm going to adopt you as a daughter, on Mother's Day you bring me a card, and on your birthday I'll bring you a card, and I will leave you my assets when I die, and you can have a key to my house, and we'll eat lunch together at fancy restaurants, and I will have you as my daughter, as my next generation love, my platonic love, the way
My
our
next
mom,
of kin.
my next of kin, as a mom loves the daughter, right? So biology, we're not connected. Law may not recognize that, but we in social work, I would wish us to recognize that. So if we did this, and we agree on this, and we do this out of affection and love and all this, and then 10, 20, 30 years later I die, and I've made a will for her to have my assets, and I want her to do my funeral and take care of my cats and all this stuff, right? This to me is a family. The two of us could be a family, as I would wish it to be. Because we've agreed on that with a clear mind and all that stuff, right? Right now, much of social work is running around trying to figure out the law and biology stuff. So the two spheres that are based on patriarchy and capitalism, law and colonization and so on, and the biology, which is completely random. Right? So kind of two chunks of stuff that we don't want to abide by.
Yeah, that are determined as important by like social values, not even real definitive. Like there's no reason that those specific things should be valued or honored more or less.
Precisely. And this is, in one way, this is so obvious, and in another way, it's incredibly revolutionary. It could change everything for everybody that we did it this way. And I would suggest to you, at other times in the history of our species, affiliation and affinity was more important in other cultures, other times. And I was telling a story earlier today that I had worked with some immigrant families for a year, so I had been very involved as an immigrant settlement worker. And in many cultures, in refugee contexts, in situations where people are in the middle of a war or so on, a person could have a baby. Like, think of the whole history of our species, the whole history of our species. There have been times where a person has a baby and the person says, I'm not strong enough, I'm not healthy enough, I'm not able to love and care for this baby the way the baby deserves. You haven't been able to have a baby. You would love to have a baby. Here, have a baby. Ta-da! Ta-da! And in some cultures, at sometimes it's been, okay, we as a community fully recognize that. Two women have had a conversation, and then the very next day, that's your baby. No stigma, no shame, no, is this a legitimate, whose sperm was it, what day, what blah, 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 blah. You have a baby, I don't, let's all get on with everything.
And that centers around the quality of life for the child rather than ownership, because that child is going to, like, assuming that this person can't take care of, they're not thinking like, oh, I can't take care, like, it's going to ruin my quality of life. I mean, perhaps they are, but also, like, I want this kid to have a good life and I can't offer it for them.
Precisely.
Can I give this kid to someone who clearly wants a kid and can offer a good life and just hasn't been able to biologically?
Even in very not that long ago or far away cultures and contexts, if preceding birth control, which got invented in 1960 and wasn't readily available until maybe 1970, and there still were barriers around, did the husband give the woman permission to take the birth control pills and so on. We'll hold all that, we'll come to that in perhaps another conversation.
Yeah.
But not that long ago, let's say in the potato famine era or something in Ireland or Scotland, in times of trouble, if one woman had 13 kids and she's pregnant with her 14th kid, it would not have been unimaginable for her to give it to her cousin, right? And everybody would just raise the child that way, and it wasn't a big deal. But now, very much our world now in the social work profession is defined still by biology and law. We want to move over here to affiliation and affinity. So, how is this important? It's a very foundational set of concepts here in terms of how we're going to proceed in social work with the clients who are in front of us.
Well, like for First Nations communities, I know it's really common, and that was like a big part of the 60s scoop, was that they were used to communal raising of children. So like there's that non-traditional child rearing where you can have like 3 or 4 kids and like this elderly grandmother and maybe like 4 or 5 women that'll be in their houses keeping an eye on them but not necessarily out there. And we go in and say, oh, there's only one person watching these kids. You're not a responsible parent because this person couldn't like save them in case of a fire or something. I don't know. And then you've already deemed them like not qualified, rather than considering that their culture is different than ours, and that ours isn't the norm or the standard, I guess, that they need to
creating
meet.
up and down instead of saying it's just different.
Yeah.
This isn't better, they're just different, and how can we make it work? From a place of love, affection, respect, dignity, and empowerment, inclusivity, how can we make it work? So, these 3 ideas here, we'll come back to those again and again and again and again, and they will underpin a lot of what we'll be talking about. And at first you kind of go, yeah, okay, I get that. It's not that complicated. And we want to move to this place of all of us through the whole life cycle, all of us are all vulnerable to all kinds of things. So there's another core assumption we're going to make. So, you might get hit by a car when you're 25, and for a year you'll be in the hospital because your legs were broken. And Tuba might get cancer and be really sick for 5 years, but then land on her feet and get back into the world and do good things. I might get Alzheimer's when I'm 61, but I might still live for another 10 years with my mind all foggy. My point being that all humans, from the time you're a zygote till the time you're dead, all of us are vulnerable to have things happen which are completely random.
and out of our control, or non-preventable.
Right, exactly.
Non-predictable, I guess.
So if we say that on a structural level, what we're going to wish for, and we're coming from this place of affinity and affiliation, all of us are connected, all of us want to care about each other. What we want to do is take a big chunk of our gross national product, our wealth as a society. We want to put that somewhere and make sure that when you get sick from your car accident, or you're sick from cancer, or I'm sick from Alzheimer's, we all can draw from that money. We all can draw from those resources. We all can draw without stigma, shame, or blame.
And without having to subsidize our wellness, because the company isn't responsible.
Precisely. We don't want to individualize and monetize illness and vulnerability. Which is a whole concept, right? So I'm going to make this practical now. Right now we have a whole bunch of things going on every single day about COVID-19, C19, and we're finding out that in Canada, for example, some people are saying right now 80% of the people who've died are people living in these for-profit care homes. We've also found out as of yesterday, they were saying in other countries, that number is half of what it was in Canada. So there's other countries where there are similar proportions of elderly people in care homes, but the care homes aren't being run for profit, and so they were being run better, more benevolently, more nurturingly, with more nurses, more support. And
with
so,
the intent to care, not
to
with the
care,
intent to make profit.
Not to make profit. So here where we have law governed by governed by patriarchy and governed by profit. And over here, all of us in biology, all of us are going to be older someday where we might end up in a care home. Okay? What we want is through affiliation and affinity that all of us say, hey, all of us will get old. It's a risk we all have. Therefore, all of us are going to pool some money so that all of us can go to care homes when we need it, and have someone give us a bath 3 times a week, have a nurse there who checks on us every day, have someone who makes sure we take our medication, have someone who provides us with good, healthy food that's full of nutrition and protein, not just carbs and fats. All of us, not just the rich. And we as a collective will take responsibility for that, even though I'm not related to you legally. Tuba's not my bloodline or by law. She's someone I care about, and I want her to do well through the whole life cycle. So this idea of the collective affinity is very revolutionary, right? So in the world we have now, what happens is if you're middle class or rich, your legal children or spouse can put you in a care home and then pay $5,000 a month for you to get a super good care. So that's a middle class privilege based on law and legal biological connection. Like I can't just grab an old person off the street and say,
Grandma!
Yeah, right? Right? Because she's not my blood relative and she's not my legal relative. So both she's not my responsibility and she's not my concern. Because we're into individualism, right? Mm-hmm. I would like it to be a world where we could say all of us care about all of us when we get older. All of us have put money into a pool. We don't want profit to be made on the backs of elderly people. This should be similar to, if I take a concrete example, highways. At one point in the history of our species, one person would pave a road or make a road nice, and if you wanted to walk on my road, you paid me a toll to pass on my road. So I paid for the road, you pay to walk on it, you give me money or you don't get to go on my road. Right?
Yeah.
Eventually we as a society said, hey, all of us, all the time, are all going on all these roads. How about the provincial government and the municipal government pay for the cost of roads? all of us, instead of every, go 5 miles, pay a toll, go 2 miles, pay a toll, go 3 miles, pay a toll, and then there'd be a wilderness where there's no road, and we'd all kind of go through the swamp and everything. Then you get back on a road and you pay a toll, right? It's ridiculous. And as a species, we went, well, we could do better. We could collectively pay for the roads. That's called your provincial tax, when you pay your provincial money. And the provincial and municipal money will go towards creating roads, sidewalks, stoplights, traffic control, all that stuff to do with roads. And then any person in Canada any day can get up and say, hey, I'm going to go on a road trip. Right? And then when you get your driver's license, there's certain standards, and when every year you have to pay to relicense your car, you get a sticker, right? So to keep the roads up, all that snow plowing. So we've managed to figure out how to do that collective owning of roads, collective paying for roads to be nice, and collective responsibility that, hey, in this area you should only drive 60 miles an hour, and in this other area you're going to drive 30 miles an hour. So if we took all that concrete planning and conceptualization and said, let's care for the elderly people that way, the same way, all of us will create standards for elder care places. We'll all pay $2 more every year on our provincial taxes.
And starting with the basis of the idea that similar to that, like roads are important, therefore we should maintain them. Elderly people are people, therefore they're important, therefore we should look after them and not let them die.
Right, they're all family, all my relations.
Because they're people and inherently are worth something.
And deserve dignity, empathy, and compassion like I have for you. And whether that person is my blood grandma or my legal grandma, through affinity, affiliation, empathy, respect, kindness, she's my grandma. And I want her to have a nice home with a good meal.
Yeah.
And I want you and you and you and everybody to want that for me. And we could do that. So that's, if I give that very contemporary example of C19, we could do better. The social work profession is involved in all of this. We want to do better. So there's thinking of elderly. Now let's transplant that idea. We have the roads, got that idea, got the elderly idea. What about childcare? There's still this idea that, hey, you got yourself pregnant, honey. You made this baby with some guy, so you and the guy, you should pay for all your childcare.
That, and disproportionately it falls on the woman. Like, she's responsible for having had the child rather than they're responsible for having had a child together. Like, I find a lot of the time, like, if the man bails, like, whatever, it's kind of normal. And she's still responsible for that kid, and it's still like, oh, well, you decided to have a baby. Like, as if she could have somehow prevented.
And that it's individually owned. If we move to the place of we all own the roads, and we want them to be happy roads. We all own grandmas and grandpas, and we all want grandmas and grandpas, because all of us will hopefully live long enough to be older. So we all want to have a nice place when we're older. So we're all going to pay for it the same way, all the roads, all the grandmas. We want to have free quality child care that is flexible, like not just 9 to 5. So quality child care, so that any woman or any man who has a child and they need their child to be cared for in the daytime while they go to school or work, they can go, and without paying $3,000 a month, or
have their child looked after and actually have it meet their needs.
Precisely. And some people go like, oh my God, this is so outrageous. And I would say to you, you know what? We already have public school from grade 1 to grade 12 where we all put the money in, and all the kids can go to school from grade 1 to grade 12, and we all pay for that through our provincial taxes.
Yeah.
Every year we all pay our taxes.
And we all gotta go.
There. And all the kids could go to school, and it's there. So all we're actually doing, although that seems, so right now we're focusing on structures of families and family care and well-being, and trying to dream it completely different. And this is our baseline platform for our subsequent conversations about social work with families. So if whenever a child needs childcare, daycare, babysitting, there's a place you can bring them. When grandma needs care or support, there's a place you can bring her, similar to the highways. We also already have the concept of universal health care. So if my husband, who was very ill for 5.5 years, he had cancer, he had heart troubles and so on, we would bring him to the hospital and they would do things to him and help him.
Because they're looking after his best interest.
Because we collectively want hospitals to be there for sick people, and he would go and get care. For his medicine, we had to pay a lot of money sometimes. So we don't yet have universal pharmacare, and that's another thing we in social work would wish for. That not just through law, like your child is sick, you are legally responsible for that child. The child needs a $500 prescription. You are legally responsible for providing that prescription. If you don't provide good pharmacare for your child, the state might take your child away because you're neglecting your child. Right? We want it to be just like all of us care about the roads, all of us care about the elderly, all of us care about daycare.
All of us care about children.
And pharmacare. We want to care about pharmacare. As you know, recently that was $6,000 that my insurance company would not cover in the end. And that was money I had to pay. And I would pay anything to keep my husband alive and to keep him here and to keep him in good health. But there were a lot of people, I'm sure, who would not have had the $6,000. Mm-hmm. And he might have died earlier.
Well, that and to base worth on linear, on a timeline. And on a schedule.
Yeah. So there's lots of things, just for the purposes of today, we in social work with families would wish for a different world. So when a client comes in front of you, much of the time, what do we do in social work, right? We're like, is this child neglected? Is this grandma okay? Is this woman being abused? Does this family have a nice apartment that's safe for them? These people are arguing, what can we do to help them? A lot of these stresses are not exclusively the individual to the individual. So you get a mom shows up, let's say, in a very ordinary kind of thing. A woman shows up, she's crying her eyes out, she's living in a dumpy apartment, she's 2 months behind with her rent, she has 2 kids, she's crying, she doesn't know what she's going to do, and so we in social work, this is a first conversation, right? And then we find, okay, where's the dad? And how can we get some money from him? Okay, where else does her parents maybe can give some money? Okay, we're going to have to put her on welfare, mother's allowance, or, maybe she has to go to a shelter, right? Oh, is she being a terrible mom? All of that still is kind of blaming and looking for who's the legally responsible dad, or following the family line of who are her parents, and they're responsible, right?
Yeah, it's like following ownership again.
Ownership.
Like tracking, yeah.
Tracking. Instead of saying, all of us could end up.
Like, what resources can we get for you, or what resources are available to you, rather than who you belong to.
Right, exactly. So just like the roads, we would say, oh, all the roads are owned by everybody. We would like to have subsidized housing available so that people who are on a limited income, whether they're on a limited income because they're caring full-time for 2 kids, or they're caring for their husband who's dying of cancer, or they were born with intellectual and physical challenges, or, if we were basing our relationships with all of us, with each other, with the resources needed in the world, if we were basing our families, our love connections on affinities and affiliation, and the world was providing enough homes and enough roads and enough cancer care medication and enough daycares, right there, we would eliminate about 80% of all our social work clients, because they wouldn't even have to talk to us. Like, oh, grandma's good. Grandma's got a beautiful place to live, and she's getting broccoli every day, and she gets a bath every second day. Yeah. I don't need to talk to a social worker about my problem, because I don't have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. With affordable housing, I can afford to now purchase groceries for my 3 kids.
Exactly. Geared to income housing. And I would suggest to you that although some people go like, this is radical, like, where are you coming with these ideas, Si? What's wrong with you that you have all these crazy fantasies? In other countries, this already exists.
Like Germany?
Germany has them. In France, for example, I met a woman, a very smart and beautiful woman that I met, who had grown up in France, and I'm not positive that it's exactly the same today, but she's about my age, and she could go to school and have her tuition paid as long as she kept up her marks. So theoretically, she could have gotten 2 PhDs, born in France. She could have just gone to school, got another PhD, and not end up with a $60,000 student debt, and not end up miserable and overwhelmed and exhausted. Because in France, just like I was saying, we here in Canada, we own collectively the highways. No one can say, well, this from here to here is my highway, and I love my highway chunk more than anybody else loves their highway chunk, and I'm not letting you be on my highway chunk.
One time I dropped a slushie on it, and I licked it, so it's mine.
It's mine. We all own all the highways. People don't even think about that. We just, of course, or the sidewalks. We all own all of us own the sidewalks, but
we have that idea of public space and private space, and it's like arbitrarily decided or delegated, and we don't even really question it a lot of the time.
Privatization, individualization, rugged individualism versus the collective well-being of the total whole. So in France, they conceptualize education as, you don't own your PhD. We all own knowledge. We all want all our citizens to have the gift of education, because the more people there are in France who have a PhD, or who are nurses, or who are doctors, or who are dentists, or who are optometrists, the people who find their verve to be a thing, to be a certain profession or body of excellence, right? We all benefit. No country has ever destroyed itself by having too many dentists, right? There's never been a revolution where people have said, oh my God, there's too many doctors and nurses. We have to stop this. It's terrible. Doctors just going around helping people be healthy. Oh my God. Right? Because if you completely went to this place of affiliation, affinity, collectivization, it's a beautiful thing. But what has happened is capitalism, patriarchy, has made it, I'm going to get an education so I can make more money, so I can charge more for my service as a dentist or an optometrist or whatever, because it's all about me, 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 me.
But simultaneously, like, you're comparing against everyone else around you. Like that elitism of like, I'm going to do this so that I can do this, but also at the same time so that I can do better than this person. So that I can get better grades, so that I can get a better job.
It's an economy of hierarchy and hoarding and selfishness, and it's based on the idea of a finite resource, right? You can only have 10 dentists in Prince George, because if you had 20 dentists, oh my God, people would just get their teeth filled whenever they were in pain.
We can have that, just willy-nilly teeth filling.
right, just random willy-nilly teeth filling, right? People would just like break their own teeth so that they could go get their teeth fixed for free. It would be horrible.
The worst.
The worst. So, although I know a lot of students find these ideas that I'm throwing out there quite outrageous and quite excessive and grandiose and bizarre, every single thing that I've said here has been done at least once in some other country, and no one was harmed by it. Except the profit mongers, the people who make money on Extendicare as a franchise like Tim Hortons.
So like the top 2%?
The top 2%, the top 10%, whichever, that range. If all of us could get our teeth fixed at a very affordable price when we needed it through the whole life cycle, if all of us could go to school and get the education that each of us wanted, because there will still be people who'd rather be a carpenter, or who'd rather be a gardener, who'd rather be, it's not like 100% of your citizenry would then, if I could just go get a PhD for free. every single citizen will say, I'm going to go get a PhD in sociology.
Yeah. Everyone has different interests, and to say that, like, and if everyone were to get a PhD, who's to say that they wouldn't have a passion for carpentry as well?
Precisely. Knowledge is something you can just keep getting more of. It's not, I could read all the books here, I could write 5,000 poems, and I could still do gardening all day.
And you could still manage to find a degree and something else to work towards.
Right? So, all of this, I'm being playful with it, I'm being expansionary about it, I'm dreaming, because as a social work profession, we have 100 years of social work where we have done bad things. The residential school, where we've been racist, sexist, homophobic, where we've colluded with capitalism. What I'm dreaming of is over the next 100 years, maybe we could be revolutionary activists for social justice. Maybe we could be more subordinating of our imaginations to indigenous ways. Let's have 100 years of indigenous folks defining what the social work profession could be. I'm ready for that. Bring it. I want that. Fire Jean Gravelin. Come on, be the dean of social work at our school. And in subsequent videos, we'll talk about more specifics and particulars, but this is a piece of theory that I think will come up and challenge all kinds of things around what is a marriage?
What's a family?
What's a family? What does it mean to do care work? What does it mean to be a mentor to future generations and to the people around you?
What's considered work?
What's considered work? What's considered giving and love and sharing? And item by item to unpack them and reflect on what's the big dream that we could have in a different world 100 years from now. So thank you for coming to the first video on social work with families. And thank you, Carlene. Thank you, Tuba. You're just awesome. It's been a great Friday and a great week.